This is the second podcast for the Introduction to HiTech Marketing, Chapter 1. As you learned in the last segment, there are three common characteristics that all high-tech markets share. This section covers other characteristics that may characterize high-tech industries, but not all. On this particular slide, Unit 1 costs refer to technology contexts where companies have very high costs to make the first prototype work. Think software, for example. Writing all the lines of code for an app, a new software algorithm is extremely time-consuming. But once that code is written, it's easy to replicate it in terms of distributing it to any iPhone that wants to download the app, any company that wants to use it. All of that is distributed digitally over the internet through cloud solutions. Unit 1 costs typically exist in these digital environments. Other high-tech industries, such as electric vehicles, for example, have very high manufacturing costs, and so these variable costs of production ultimately add up to be quite expensive. Unit 1 costs are when the variable costs of production are extremely low, as in digital distribution contexts. This is a continuum. Unit 1 costs are either going to be very high or very low. And we'll talk about the implications of Unit 1 costs a little bit later in our pricing chapter. Tradability problems essentially mean that it's very difficult to value the know-how embedded in high-tech products. And this becomes particularly important when companies decide they'd like to license a patent or to do a merger and acquisition, because it's extremely difficult to place a dollar value on this intellectual property. Knowledge spillovers occur when new discoveries in one domain oftentimes form the basis for new discoveries in another domain. And in fact, these new discoveries in the other domain may never have occurred without the prior discoveries in the other area. Let me give a concrete example of this. In the area of animal health, one of the biggest issues that ranchers solve is parasites that affect the health of their animals. And in fact, animals can die from dehydration just like people can with parasites. And oftentimes these parasites are transferred by flies or biting insects, like they are in humans. But because of the cost of the rancher's investment in their livestock, there's oftentimes a very good financial incentive to treat those animals. Whereas when we talk about the business model for pharmaceuticals, oftentimes the people who might suffer from parasites live in very poverty-stricken areas of the world that it's hard to access health care. And so Merck, as a company, had discovered that some of the anti-parasitic medicine that they use in cattle could actually solve similar parasitic problems in people who are struck by an illness called river blindness. We cover this in Chapter 13. And the Merck scientists are very quick to say that if they hadn't developed this for their cattle market, they probably never would have found this cure for humans. So this is a very important property of intellectual property called knowledge spillovers. One of the characteristics of high-tech environments that we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this semester is a phenomenon called network effects. You'll see that when we wrote this chapter and when we wrote this slide, it was called network externalities at the time. And because technology markets continue to evolve and develop, so do the concepts and the lexicon. These are now called network effects. A network effect, think of the Facebook movie. It was called The Network Effect, and I hope all of you saw it. It was a great movie. Network effects occur when the value that I get as a customer from using the product is a function of how many other people also use the product. So on Facebook, for example, if there's only 3 people on the Facebook platform, the value isn't very high. And the fact is, the reason that many of these social media platforms succeed is because the more people who join them, the more value there is for every single user. And that value increases exponentially. And this value has been captured in a mathematical formulation called Metcalfe's law. M-E-T-C-A-L-F, Metcalfe's law. Other names for these network effects are called demand-side increasing returns. That's what an economist called it. And bandwagon effects are oftentimes what it's called in the popular press. And what you'll see here is that network effects exist when the product itself is driven by communications and connectivity between and among the users. So this is a picture that we took off Wikipedia using telephones from the 1940s and 50s. And what you'll see is if you can only call one other person who has a phone, the value of the phone is pretty limited. But through permutations and combinations of all the links, the more people who have phones, the more value it is to each individual user. This was true with fax machines when they came on in the early 80s, and again it's true of most of our digital technology today. Now what I've described so far is a direct network effect. This is based on the number of people who currently use the product platform or the technology platform, and that number of users is called the installed base. So this word installed base is important. Sometimes they're called captive customers because they use a particular platform. For example, I use Facebook. Now Path is a competing social network. Google Plus is a competing platform, and what you'll see is the value is a function of how many of your friends are on those other platforms. Now there's another source of a network effect, and it's called an indirect effect. The way an indirect effect works, it's based on the complementary products that give value to the base product. So for example, if I'm going to buy an iPhone, I'm going to get the value of my iPhone because it can call anybody else who has a phone. Certainly if nobody else had any phone, it wouldn't have very much value. But in today's society, pretty much everybody has a phone and I can call them. But what would make me buy an Apple iPhone compared to a Google-based Droid phone could be a function of the number of apps that are available. And these apps are based on an indirect network effect. Okay, let's go ahead and jump up just a couple slides to this picture. What you'll see in the heart of the spiral is the number of users on the far right side. So as I increase the number of users, the value to each user increases, which is the direct effect. But as I have more installed users on my platform, then developers are going to be given a greater incentive to develop for my platform, say the Apple iPhone versus the Droid. And the more apps that I get on my platform, then that's going to give more value to each user. And this becomes a virtuous cycle that essentially explains why we have de facto monopolies that arise around technology platforms. Now if we go back on the upper left-hand side of this figure, the key question that marketers face of these technology products that are driven by either direct and or indirect effects is how do we jumpstart this cycle? And one of the major ways to jumpstart this cycle is to make sure customers don't have a FUD factor. And how do we reduce their FUD factor? One thing we learned in Chapter 1 earlier under market uncertainty is that we don't want to have incompatible industry standards or platforms, because if we have incompatibility, then customers are going to have FUD, and it's going to decrease their likelihood of adoption. So one of the most important things industries can do at its outset is to establish an industry standard so that we don't have competing platforms. This is one of the major issues that we're facing right now in the electric vehicle industry, is this issue of competing plug types. And what we're trying to do is to convene an industry consortium to agree on standards. I'm going to come back to this later. Okay, now going back to the couple slides that I skipped over to get to the figure. What comes first, the base product or the complements, the chicken or the egg? Many people believe that you have to have the device first, and the more broadly deployed the device will be, it will drive the adoption and the creation of the apps or the software. But what's interesting is that in some markets, the availability of the software is actually what drives the sales of the hardware. Now, I'm going to give just a couple of examples of this because it's a really counterintuitive thought, that the infrastructure around the platform can actually be more important than the platform itself. So if we look at electric vehicles again, yes, I get the full value of my electric vehicle that I drive when I get in and go, because it takes me where I need. But the fact is, if there was some charging infrastructure around, I would be able to drive more vehicle miles traveled on electric. And so in this particular case, what anecdotal evidence shows is that the mere presence and visibility of charging stations actually makes people feel comfortable in buying an electric vehicle, and they're more likely to buy if they've actually seen that the infrastructure exists. So what are the critical success factors for industries that are characterized by these network effects? The number one factor is, how do you quickly grow the installed base? This is called a get big fast strategy, GBF. And oftentimes what it means, and again this is very counterintuitive, give your product away for free. Because if I give my product away for free, which is actually the approach a lot of open source software takes, more people are going to learn the platform and be loyal to the platform because of later switching costs, and that platform itself becomes a barrier to entry for other companies. In addition to quickly growing the installed base, giving it away free is one example, also partnerships are another example. We're going to come back to how to establish an industry standard in Chapter 5. Industries have to have this industry standard because without them, that incompatibility increases customer fear, uncertainty, and doubt. These are two critical factors for success that lead to very counterintuitive strategic implications. Now, since our chapter was written, there has been quite a bit of research done on what are called industry ecosystems. And so one of the biggest takeoffs that we're going to do is we're going to be focusing on diagramming industry ecosystems and what that means for these network effects. Okay, here we see the get big fast strategy. And here we see the fact that with this notion of network effects, the best technology may not be the one that is the largest. We do see that monopolies come into play because of this. It was the major reason that Microsoft was investigated in the 1990s, because its operating system had become the de facto monopoly, and coupled with its oftentimes nefarious emails that indicated punitive actions for its partners who were using competing software, led them to have to reveal their source code and make it more widely available to limit their monopolistic behavior. And even if a new technology comes along that's better, given the power of this installed base, it's very difficult to get customers to switch to a platform that there aren't as many network effects available. Okay, the next section of the chapter deals with the fact that when we talk about technology and innovation, there are many different ways that innovations have been categorized. And there's a table in your book that essentially summarizes these types of innovations. And I'm going to go through them because they are critically important for the type of marketing strategy and the marketing implications that are derived from each of these typologies. First of all, the incremental versus breakthrough innovation is the primary typology that we'll be using through the semester in this class. As you see here, an incremental innovation is a continuation of an existing product. And it means that there are minor improvements that are made on this platform. So when we talk about Facebook, we see that there's different ways that the birthdays are flagged and different ways to post and different ways to do your timeline. Those would all be considered incremental innovations. These are evolutionary tweaks to the platform. At the opposite end of the continuum is a breakthrough or a radical innovation. And for those of you who recall your Principles of Marketing class very well, these were called discontinuous innovations. These are totally new products and new technologies that are revolutionary and are going to change the way the industry works. For example, when we talk about breakthrough innovations in the area of, let me think of a quick example here, mobile computing, what we see is that mobile computing used to be based on analog platforms, 1G networks, then it went digital, 2G networks, then it went to 3G faster networks, and now we're in 4G networks. 4G is a totally different way of sharing those packets of data to make them extremely fast, particularly when it comes to streaming media. And this revolutionary idea is actually driving innovation in lots of different areas. Okay, another typology from Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School is sustaining versus disruptive. Disruptive innovation is a new innovation that actually takes features out of existing technologies to make it less sophisticated and often less expensive. So when we think about doing video on demand over the internet, we have WebEx solutions that are really good and sophisticated. But the fact is, Skype came along. It was simpler, it was free for a long time, and it was convenient. And it appealed to lower-end customers because we were willing to handle kind of the inconvenience of dropped calls or fuzzy calls. Whereas businesses and corporations simply wouldn't allow that kind of low quality to work for them. What ends up happening to these low-end disruptions, however, is that they continue to improve over time, and ultimately these high-end customers are paying for features that they don't use all the time, and they realize that they could probably get by with this new and improved disruptive innovation that's come far enough along that it works just fine. When I collect market research, for example, it's only a very few businesses that I talk to that say, oh, we can't do it over Skype. And it's typically for security reasons more so than for reliability or quality reasons. Disruptive innovations are coming from emerging economies known as base of the pyramid markets. And these emerging economies, because they have less affluent consumers, oftentimes operating products in very extreme environmental conditions, no access to electricity, a lot of dirt, a lot of humidity. Those innovations are coming back to disrupt U.S. markets. Think about the Tata Nano car, for example, a $2,000 car. People say it's a matter of time before those things actually hit the U.S. as they improve enough to meet our standards for safety. Okay, let's back up for a sec. I'll let you do architectural and modular innovations on your own. Let me just quickly go over product, process, and organizational. Product innovations are the innovations that users buy. Process innovations are innovations that a company or organization makes to run its own business. There's a company up in Kalispell called SemiTool. The product technology that SemiTool sells are huge multi-million-dollar machines that are sold to the Intels of the world to make chips on their manufacturing line. And what SemiTool realized, in order to produce these machines, they had to invent their own manufacturing technology to run their manufacturing lines. Similarly, many companies develop their own internal software to meet their own needs, either for sustainability accounting or for Salesforce management, and then those innovations could be commercialized and sold to an entirely new group of customers. Organizational innovations are innovations in the way the company runs its management. So, for example, an organizational innovation could be a new business model, it could be a new marketing methodology. The big data that's being used right now to drive organizational decision making is a type of organizational innovation. Because we're going to rely primarily on the incremental versus breakthrough or radical distinction in this class, I'm going to go through the characteristics that characterize one end of the continuum versus the other. As we know from the definition on the prior slide, incremental innovations are extensions of existing products. These are sometimes called whiter whites, brighter brights. And in this case, the product characteristics are well defined, and customers know what they want and they can ask for it. I would like bigger cup holders to handle my 32-ounce sodas in my car rather than smaller ones. And what's interesting is that competitive advantage in these industries is oftentimes based on economies of scale in production. So how do we squeeze out costs in the production process? There's a lot of outsourcing that goes on here to drive these cost advantages in production. As I mentioned, customers can ask for what they want on the incremental side, and these are referred to as demand side or customer pull markets. On the flip side, for new technologies oftentimes create new markets that we didn't know existed previously. So the inventors in the lab come up with some new invention, say nanotechnology, and we never knew how nanoparticles worked before. And we really don't know exactly what the best market opportunity is. And then all of a sudden we're going to have wrinkle-free clothes or personalized medicine that targets specific genes. And the hallmark of this is that these radical technologies jump to a new technology life cycle. Superior functional performance over the old technology essentially means new S-shaped curve, whereas those incremental innovations are on an existing S-shaped curve. And when these scientists in the lab invent these things, oftentimes these are invented in research labs on university campuses. And these inventors don't care at all about commercial market opportunities. And in fact, for some of them, commercializing their invention can be considered distasteful because it's a sellout. And these are sometimes called supply-side markets or technology push situations. Okay, I already described the disruptive innovation and the radical, and what you'll see is radical innovation jumps to a new technology life cycle, but disruption oftentimes is at the lower end. Another way to look at the way innovation occurs is to look at a supply chain. We are going to be diagramming supply chains extensively in this class, and we'll also be adding in more complete components of the ecosystem. For example, the complete component for the ecosystem for cars would also include things like gas and gas stations, as well as car maintenance and car repair shops that frequently are not obtained through car dealers, the market for tires, through Tire-Rama and places like this, the ecosystem is going to include the whole set of players that help customers get the value out of their cars. We could also include car washes in this, for example. As far as the supply chain itself goes for the specific item, cars, where do customers buy cars? They get them from dealers. Dealers get their inventory from their manufacturers. Manufacturers are sometimes called OEMs, original equipment manufacturers. And what do manufacturers need to actually run their business? Well, they have to get in all the electronic control modules, the tires, the glass, the steel, the aluminum, all the components. They need all their manufacturing equipment. And they need services. They need advertising services, cleaning services, market research services. And for these supply chains, the flow of dollars goes from right to left, and the flow of goods and services goes from left to right. Dollars go upstream, goods and services go downstream. Now think about the way you drive a car. Even if you buy an electric car, to what extent is your behavior disrupted? Well, I still drive on the same roads, I still have a gas pedal and a brake pedal. The only difference for me is I plug in at home and I have to make sure that when I run out of electricity that there's a place for me to charge. But I'm still driving. It's not like I have a jetpack and I'm flying to work every day. Car dealers, to what extent has their business model needed to change because of electric vehicles? Well, again, a little bit. They don't make as much money on after-sales service and support because these cars are pretty self-contained, don't need oil changes, but really they're still selling cars. Some of them have decided to add a charging station, but it's not because they're trying to make money off charging yet. So their business model is still based on selling cars. Car manufacturers. Now they've faced some rather significant changes. They've had to change their manufacturing lines, which is a huge investment, and they've had to retrain their dealers. So we've seen more changes needed because of the new technology at this level of the supply chain. But where have most of the inventions been for electric cars? It's actually been in the battery technology itself. And that is where the radical innovation is occurring. So if you had to look at the implications of the supply chain for radical innovation, the fact is most radical innovation in most industries occurs far upstream at the realm that is far removed from the actual user. Even in the case of nanotechnology with fabric and apparel, the fact is I still wear clothes, I just don't have to iron them. Or I still wear a jacket that's waterproof, and to me the fact that it's developed by this patented, protected, new nanotechnology doesn't really change my behavior at all. So when we ask what's a high-tech industry, what's a low-tech industry, it's kind of a red herring sort of a question. It's a question that the answer is disguised or hiding. The innovation occurs at upstream levels, even for low-tech industries like pencils. We might get new innovations in the actual lead, for example. I think paper clips are the one thing that people say hasn't changed or had any new inventions in ages. Now, what are the implications of this for marketing? Because this is a marketing class. Marketing for incremental innovations is different than marketing for breakthrough innovations. And the reason is because of the differences in their characteristics. Most companies have to manage both types of innovations, and therefore they must be ambidextrous in the marketing skills they have. The model we'll be using all semester for this class is captured in the contingency theory of high-tech marketing. What is the ultimate outcome variable? It's success of our new technologies. And what we learn in basic marketing is that there's a marketing toolkit, targeting, value proposition, 4 Ps, research, that if we just use those well, we're going to get new product success. But that's not true in high-tech industries. The type of marketing strategy depends on whether it's a breakthrough or incremental innovation. And we have to use one marketing toolkit for incremental innovations And if we use that same toolkit for breakthrough innovations, it would fail. So for this class, we're going to learn a new toolkit for marketing strategy that is matched for breakthrough innovations in order to ensure success for breakthrough technologies. This is called the contingency theory of high-tech marketing. And another way to look at this is through a table. On the left-hand side, I have some traditional marketing strategies. Market research, role of advertising, role of pricing. How do product developers interact with marketing personnel? And we have the continuum across the top, breakthrough innovation versus incremental innovation. And what you see is that there is a difference in each of these cells, which means that the type of marketing done for breakthrough is different than the type of marketing for incremental. And what you'll see is that each chapter in the book goes through this contingency theory and explains clearly how high-tech marketing is different for these breakthrough innovations. And we'll elaborate on each of these cells as we go through the book. And this is the framework for your book, and as we get into it, you'll see that we're going to focus the first part of the semester on the left-hand side of this box, where we'll be focusing on issues that are internal to the high-tech company. Then we'll move into understanding customers. Then we'll go through each of the 4 P's, product, price, place, promotion, and then we'll deal with societal and ethical concerns that affect the high-tech marketing environment. Look forward to working with you through the course of this material.